What happens when the mask of tranquility slips, revealing a rot that has been festering just beneath the surface? In a town where everyone's smiles and secrets are the local currency, one gruesome discovery is about to expose a truth more terrifying than anyone could imagine. A young woman gone too soon, family shattered by betrayal, and a secret so dark it was sealed in steel and sunk in shadow. Before we drag this horrifying tale into the light, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell. You won't want to be left alone in the dark for this one. Of course, I will now expand upon the story, beginning with a highly detailed version of Chapter 1. This chapter will focus on establishing the atmosphere, delving deep into the protagonist's psyche, and painting a vivid, unsettling picture of the crime and the characters involved, setting a strong foundation for the rest of the narrative. The fog, a pearl-gray shroud, crept and coiled through the valley, muffling the world in a profound and damp silence. It clung to the crimson and gold leaves of the maple trees that lined the winding road into Havenwood, a town that sold itself on serenity. On postcards, it was a jewel of New England charm, with its white-steepled church, its tidy town square, and its Victorian storefronts. But to Detective Miles Corbin, the fog felt like an omen, a physical manifestation of the secrets the town kept so well. He stood on the deck of his small, isolated house overlooking Havenwood Lake, a mug of black coffee warming his hands. The tremor was back. It was a faint, almost imperceptible vibration in his right hand, a ghostly echo of the weapon's recoil, a permanent souvenir from a night of fire and screaming in a Philadelphia warehouse. That night had cost him his partner, his nerve, and his career. Havenwood was supposed to be his penance, his quiet purgatory. Here, the biggest crime was typically a teenager spray painting the town gazebo or a dispute over property lines. For 2 years, it had worked. The silence of the lake had slowly begun to quiet the echoes in his head. His phone buzzed on the railing, a harsh, intrusive sound that sliced through the morning calm. It was dispatch. "Corbin," he answered, his voice still thick with sleep. "Miles, it's Sarah. You need to get down to the old quarry. East bank of the river." The dispatcher's voice, usually a beacon of unshakable calm, was strained. "Some kids found something. Something bad." "How bad is bad, Sarah?" Miles asked, already moving back inside to pull on his boots. A pause. "The kind of bad Havenwood isn't supposed to have." The drive to the quarry was a descent into a forgotten part of town. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a muddy, rutted track. Yellow and blue police lights pulsed weakly through the dense fog, creating a surreal, theatrical scene. He saw the local news van already there, a vulture circling a fresh kill. Miles parked behind Ava Chen's cruiser and got out, pulling the collar of his worn leather jacket up against the chill. Ava met him at the tape line. She was a native born and bred in Havenwood, and her face, usually bright with a youthful optimism that Miles found both endearing and naive, was a pale, drawn mask. "It's God, Miles, I've never seen anything like it," she whispered, her eyes wide and fixed on the scene by the river's edge. Miles's gaze followed hers. A rusted 55-gallon oil drum lay on its side in the mud, its lid pried crudely open. The forensics team, dressed in white Tyveks, moved around it with a quiet, grim purpose. 2 teenagers, wrapped in emergency blankets, sat on the bumper of an ambulance, their faces ashen. But it was the smell that hit him first, a foul, cloying sweetness of advanced decay, mixed with the sharp, chemical bite of quicklime. It was a scent he knew all too well, the scent of a desperate, frantic attempt to erase a human being. He ducked under the tape, his entire demeanor shifting. The mask of the quiet retiree dissolved, replaced by the hard, angular focus of the homicide detective he used to be. His voice was flat, stripped of all inflection. "Talk to me, Ava. The boys, Josh and Liam, found it about an hour ago," she said, walking with him. "Skipping school. Said it was half in the water, wedged against those rocks. They got curious." "Curiosity killed the cat," Miles muttered, his eyes scanning the ground. He noted the drag marks leading from the thicker woods, the crushed ferns, the disturbed earth. Someone had hauled this thing here. It hadn't just washed ashore. He stopped a few feet from the drum, letting the forensics team work. He could see enough. The interior was a grotesque soup of gray sludge, lime, and something horrifically organic. A flash from a forensic camera illuminated a pale, slender bone protruding from the concrete-like mixture. "We got an ID?" he asked the lead forensic tech. "You're kidding, right? From this, it'll be days before we can even separate everything, let alone get dental or DNA. It's a jigsaw puzzle from hell. Female, we think. Small frame. Been in there a while. Months, maybe." Miles nodded slowly, his mind already working, clicking through possibilities. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a disposal. Calculated. Cold. The dismemberment, the drum, the lime, the concretite was a checklist for making someone disappear forever. But they had failed. The river, swollen by autumn rains, had given up its dead. Hours bled into one another. The fog eventually burned off, revealing a cold, indifferent blue sky. The teenagers had given their statements. The news crews had been pushed back, and the drum, now a sealed piece of evidence, was carefully loaded onto a truck for transport to the state medical examiner's office. Back at the small, outdated police station, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and a tension Havenwood hadn't felt in decades. Miles and Ava began the painstaking work of combing through missing persons reports from the last year, starting locally and expanding outward. "Here's one," Ava said, her voice quiet. "Clara Holloway, reported missing 6 months ago. 19 years old." Miles leaned over her shoulder, reading the screen. The photo showed a girl with a vibrant, rebellious smile and intelligent, dark eyes. She looked full of life. "What's the story?" "Family said she ran off," Ava explained, scrolling through the sparse report. "Packed a bag. Left a note saying she was going to the city to find herself. She'd apparently threatened to do it before. The chief at the time, well, he took the family's word for it. Case closed." "The family is Marcus Holloway," Miles stated, not as a question. "The one and only," Ava confirmed. "He basically owns half the valley. Built the new golf course, the luxury condos by the lake. Sits on every board. He's basically royalty here, Miles. And royalty doesn't have messy family problems," Miles finished, a cynical edge to his voice. "Let's pay them a visit." The Holloway mansion was a sprawling stone and glass monument to new money, perched on a hill overlooking the town it dominated. It wasn't a home, it was a statement. A meticulously manicured lawn rolled down to a wrought iron gate that opened silently as they approached. Marcus Holloway met them at the door. He was a tall, imposing man in his 50s, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and the predatory stillness of a shark. He ushered them into a cavernous living room with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked too expensive to sit on. His wife, Eleanor, was there, a wraith-like figure in a silk dress. She was beautiful, but it was a brittle, fragile beauty, like a pressed flower. She clutched a glass of what looked like water but Miles suspected was gin, her eyes vacant and unfocused. Julian, the son, stood by the massive fireplace, restlessly pacing. He had his father's height and his mother's dark, brooding good looks. Miles delivered the news with practiced, professional detachment, explaining the discovery of the unidentified remains and the potential, however remote, that they could be Clara's. He watched them all, a trinity of wealth and power, absorbing the information. It was Marcus who spoke first, his voice a low, controlled baritone. "Detective, I appreciate you informing us, but I must remind you that our daughter left of her own accord. This gruesome discovery, while a tragedy for some family, has nothing to do with us." His focus was on control, on managing the information. Eleanor simply let out a small, wounded sound, a barely audible whimper, and took a large sip from her glass. It was Julian whose reaction was the most jarring. "Nothing to do with us?" he exploded, turning from the fireplace. His face was a mask of rage. He slammed his fist into the stone mantelpiece with a loud crack. "Our sister is gone. And you say it has nothing to do with us? But as quickly as the rage appeared, it vanished, replaced by a sullen grief. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. It was a powerful display, but to Miles it felt rehearsed. The anger, the sorrow every beat felt performed. They left the mansion with a polite but firm dismissal from Marcus, who promised to have his lawyer contact them. As they drove back down the winding driveway, Ava broke the silence. "What did you make of that?" "A masterclass in controlled chaos," Miles said, his eyes on the road. "Dad's in damage control mode, Mom's checked out, and the son put on a show for us. Nobody acted like a person who was just told their missing daughter might be dead." The call from the ME came late that night as Miles sat in his dark office. The case files spread before him. "Miles, you're not going to believe this," the medical examiner said, his voice crackling over the line. "We got the concrete and lime off the hands. The right hand. She was holding something, clutched so tight she must have been holding it when she died." Miles sat up straighter. "What was it?" "A small wooden bird. Hand-carved. Very detailed. And one more thing. Cause of death wasn't the dismemberment. That happened post-mortem. The skull shows a single, massive fracture from blunt force trauma. She was killed by a blow to the head." Miles hung up the phone, the silence of the office pressing in on him. This changed everything. It wasn't just a disposal anymore. It was a murder. And the victim, a girl who supposedly just ran away, had died clutching a small, hand-carved bird. It was the first piece that didn't fit, the first thread he could pull. He stood up and walked to the evidence locker, retrieving the small, sealed bag. He poured the wooden bird into his palm. It was smooth and cool to the touch, impossibly light. It was a secret, and Miles knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this tiny, silent witness was going to unravel the perfect, peaceful town of Havenwood. Of course. Here are the fully detailed subsequent chapters of the story, expanding on the established characters, plot, and atmosphere. The day after the discovery, Havenwood awoke as a different town. The morning fog seemed to have been replaced by a less tangible, more sinister haze of suspicion and fear. Neighbors who had shared pleasantries for years now exchanged wary glances. The Holloway name, once a symbol of aspiration and power, was now whispered in hushed, speculative tones. For Miles, the real work was just beginning. The path to the truth, he knew, wouldn't be found in the sterile environment of the forensics lab, but in the tangled, messy lives Clara Holloway had left behind. His first stop was a small cafe called The Daily Grind, a place he knew Clara and her friends frequented. He and Ava took a booth in the corner, the scent of roasting coffee and baked goods a stark, almost offensive contrast to the grim nature of their task. Clara's two closest friends, Maya and Chloe, arrived together, a pair of college students united in grief and nervous energy. Maya was pale and trembled slightly, while Chloe's eyes held a spark of defiance and anger. "Her father wants everyone to think she was some wild child who just ran off," Chloe said, her voice sharp, after Miles had gently explained the situation. "That's a lie. Clara was smart, she was funny, but she was trapped. That house wasn't a home, it was a prison. A beautiful, expensive prison." "Trapped how?" Ava asked, her tone soft and empathetic. Maya finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Her father, Marcus, he controlled everything. What she wore, who she saw, where she went. He had trackers on her car, on her phone. He said it was for her safety, but it was about possession. She was just another one of his perfect things." "Did she ever talk about wanting to leave for good?" Miles probed. "All the time," Chloe confirmed. "But she was scared. She said she had to do it right. She said she had something on him. Something that would finally give her leverage to get away without him coming after her." Chloe's eyes then filled with tears. She was also in love. She wouldn't have left without him. "Him?" Miles leaned forward, his focus sharpening. "Leo," Maya whispered. "Leo Garcia. Her family didn't know. They would have. Well, Marcus would have destroyed him. Leo's a townie. His family owns the auto shop on the old highway." That was the thread Miles needed. He and Ava left the grieving girls and drove to Garcia's auto and repair. It was another world entirely from the Holloway estate. A world of grease and gasoline, of hard-working men with dirt under their fingernails. They found Leo Garcia under the hood of a pickup truck, his face smudged with oil, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he saw them, his body tensed. He was handsome in a rugged, unassuming way, with kind eyes that were now clouded with a deep, weary sadness. In the station's small, cinder-block interrogation room, Leo was a study in coiled anxiety. Miles started gently, asking about his relationship with Clara. Leo's story tumbled out a secret romance of stolen moments, late-night drives, and dreams of escaping Havenwood together. When Miles produced the evidence bag containing the wooden bird, Leo's composure finally broke. "I made that for her," he choked out, tears tracing clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. "It's a wren. I carved it for her on her birthday. She said it was her favorite because they were small but had the loudest, most beautiful song." He looked up at Miles, his expression a raw plea for understanding. "She was going to leave. That last night we had a fight. She was finally ready to go, to expose her father, and I got scared. I told her it was too dangerous. She called me a coward and stormed off. That was the last time I saw her." Leo's grief felt authentic, his story plausible. But he had motive, opportunity, and had admitted to a fight on the night she disappeared. He was the perfect suspect. And Marcus Holloway was not a man to let an opportunity go to waste. Within 24 hours, the narrative in Havenwood had shifted. Marcus, through his lawyer, released a statement expressing his family's heartbreak and their horror that their daughter had fallen in with a violent and unstable individual. Anonymous sources began leaking stories to the local press about Julian's past minor offenses, reframing them as Julian trying to protect his sister from her dangerous boyfriend. The town, eager for a simple solution and swayed by the Holloway influence, began to turn on Leo. "Townie Killer" was spray-painted on the garage door of his family's business. While the town convicted Leo, Ava used her local connections to dig deeper into the Holloway's past. She spent an afternoon at a nursing home, talking to a retired housekeeper who had worked for the family for over 20 years. The woman, frail but sharp, told Ava about Eleanor. "Oh, Mrs. Holloway was a firecracker when they first married," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. "Spoke her mind, had her own friends, her own life. Then came the accident. A fall down those grand stairs. Marcus said she slipped. But after that, she was never the same. The fire went out. The doctors came, then the pills. She became a ghost in her own home. The pressure from the police chief and the district attorney, both of whom played golf with Marcus Holloway every Saturday, was becoming immense. Arrest the Garcia kid, Miles, the chief had ordered. We have a confession to a fight. He had no alibi, and the town wants this over. Miles felt the walls closing in, the same political pressure and rush to judgment that had led to the disaster in Philadelphia. He knew in his gut that Leo Garcia was not their killer. The real monster was still out there, hiding in plain sight. Driven by a mix of instinct and desperation, he secured a warrant to search Clara's room, citing the need to look for any personal items that could confirm her state of mind. He returned to the Holloway mansion alone. This time he was not a guest. He was an intruder in their carefully constructed world. Clara's room was a museum of a girlhood, preserved in amber. Everything was perfect, clean, and lifeless, felt staged like a show home. As he was about to leave, frustrated, his foot caught on the edge of the plush Persian rug. He knelt down and noticed a single, faint scratch on the polished dark wood of the floorboards, just under the edge of the bed. It was almost invisible, but it was a flaw in an otherwise flawless room. Using the tip of his pocketknife, he pried at the board, came loose with a soft groan. There, in a small, hollowed-out space, was a leather-bound diary and a silver USB flash drive. He quickly pocketed them. Clara Holloway was about to tell her own story. Miles didn't log the diary and the USB drive into evidence. Not yet. He knew that anything this crucial could be buried in bureaucratic red tape or conveniently misplaced by forces loyal to Marcus Holloway. That night, he sat in his quiet house by the lake, the only light coming from a single desk lamp, and broke the small lock on the diary. As he opened the cover, he felt like a desecrator of relics, an intruder into a young woman's most private thoughts. Clara's handwriting was a beautiful, flowing script, but the words it formed were filled with a quiet terror. October 12th, Father was in one of his moods today. He found a book of poetry Leo had given me. He didn't yell. It's worse when he doesn't yell. He just held it in his hand and told me it was unsuitable. He said the Garcias were beneath us, that I was a Holloway, and I needed to remember what that meant. He tore a page out, slowly, and dropped it in the fire. He never looked at me, just the flames. I feel like that page. November 5th, Julian tried to stand up for me today. Father was criticizing my choice of college applications, calling them unambitious. Julian told him to leave me alone. Later, I heard them shouting in the study. I heard a thud. Now Julian has a bruise on his cheek he says he got from the gym. He protects me, but he's terrified too. Sometimes I see Father's rage in his eyes, and it scares me more than anything. He is his father's son, and I fear he's as much a prisoner as I am. The most chilling entries were the most recent. Clara had stumbled upon her father's secret. She had found a hidden ledger in his study, detailing a complex money laundering scheme funneled through shell corporations tied to his development projects. She didn't understand all the numbers, but she understood the criminality. February 21st, I have it. The proof. I used the camera pen Julian gave me for my birthday as a joke and copied the files from his computer onto a drive. Financials, names, offshore accounts. It's all there. This is my ticket out. I contacted a journalist, an investigative reporter from the city. He's interested. He's careful. We're supposed to meet. With this, Father can't touch me. He can't follow me. For the first time, I feel like I might actually be free. Miles felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was the motive. Not a lover's quarrel, but the desperate act of a powerful man about to be exposed. He called a former colleague from Philadelphia, a cybercrime expert he trusted implicitly. He emailed the encrypted files from the USB drive. The call back came within the hour. Miles, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? His friend asked, his voice grave. This is high-level stuff. We're talking millions in laundered money. There's enough here to put this Holloway guy away for decades. And listen to this. He played an audio file. It was a recording, slightly muffled, of Marcus Holloway's voice, cold and laced with menace. You are a loose end, the voice said, and I am very, very good at tying up loose ends. Permanently. The next morning, the tires on Miles's car were slashed. All four. It was a crude, obvious message. That night, a phone call. He answered to dead silence, just the faint sound of breathing on the other end before the line clicked off. The old paranoia, the hypervigilance he'd come to Havenwood to escape, began to creep back in. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The tremor in his hand grew more pronounced. Ava noticed his frayed nerves, the dark circles under his eyes. You need to be careful, Miles, she warned, her loyalty to him overriding her fear. This man is not just some local bully. He's dangerous. Her own investigation, meanwhile, had borne fruit. Following up on the oil drums manufacturer, she had traced the specific batch to a large purchase order made 2 years ago by a contractor. That contractor's sole client for the last 5 years? A subsidiary of Holloway Development. They had been hired to clear an old, defunct cement factory on the outskirts of town. A perfect place to get a drum, lime, and concrete, all in one spot. They drove out to the site together. It was a skeletal ruin, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Weeds grew through cracks in the concrete, and rusted machinery stood like forgotten dinosaurs. As they surveyed the desolate landscape, Ava pointed to the ground. In the semi-hardened mud near a crumbling loading dock were tire tracks. They were deep and distinctive. Wide wheelbase performance tread, Miles observed, kneeling down. Not a contractor's truck. Ava pulled out her phone and brought up a photo from Julian Holloway's social media page. It was a picture of him leaning proudly against his custom-built sports coupe. The tires in the photo were a perfect match. They had Julian. They had him at the disposal site. As they were driving back to the station, triumphant, a news alert flashed on Ava's phone. Her face went white. "Miles," she said, her voice shaking. "That journalist. The one Clara mentioned in her diary. His name was Peter Singh." She held out the phone. The headline read, "Investigative reporter Peter Singh found dead in apparent suicide." Miles pulled the car over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching under the tires. It wasn't a message anymore. It was a declaration of war. Marcus Holloway wasn't just covering his tracks. He was digging new graves. The tire track evidence gave them the leverage they needed. They didn't come for Julian Holloway with sirens blazing. Miles and Ava pulled up to the Holloway estate in their unmarked sedan as the sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the immaculate lawn. Julian was by the pool, a drink in his hand, the very picture of unconcerned privilege. The swagger vanished from his face the moment he saw them. In the sterile confines of the interrogation room, Julian's arrogance was a brittle shield. He started with practiced denials, threats about his father's lawyers, and dismissive smirks. Miles let him talk, watching him, letting the silence stretch and fester. Ava sat quietly in the corner, a steady, observant presence. "Let's talk about your car, Julian," Miles began, his voice calm and even. He slid a photograph of the tire tracks across the table. "These were found at the old cement factory. They match your custom tires perfectly. It's a funny place to take a car like that for a drive." Julian's smirk faltered. "I go lots of places. We also have the drum," Miles continued, his voice dropping lower. "We know it came from a Holloway-owned site. We know you were there." He paused, then delivered the next blow. "And we have Clara's diary." At the mention of the diary, Julian flinched as if he'd been struck. The color drained from his face. Miles didn't relent. He opened a folder and began to read, not the entries about Marcus, but the ones about Julian. He read Clara's words about his protective instincts, about his shared fear, about her worry that their father was destroying him. "I love Julian," Miles read, quoting Clara's delicate script, "but I see father's shadow in his eyes. I'm afraid of what he's becoming." That was what broke him. A single tear traced a path down Julian's cheek, then another. The shield shattered completely, and a torrent of guilt, fear, and grief poured out. "I didn't kill her," he sobbed, his head in his hands. "You have to believe me. I didn't kill her." "Then tell us what happened, Julian," Ava said softly, her voice filled with a compassion Miles couldn't muster. "Tell us the truth." And he did. The story came out in a broken, agonizing rush. It happened in the grand living room. Clara had finally confronted Marcus, her backpack on, the USB drive in her pocket. She told him she was leaving, and she was taking his secrets with her. He had laughed at first, then his face had turned to stone. He'd lunged for her backpack, and she had fought back. It was a struggle, more of a frantic, desperate dance than a fight. Marcus had shoved her hard. Her feet had tangled in the rug, and she had fallen backward. "There was this sound," Julian whispered, his eyes seeing a memory he couldn't escape. This awful, wet, cracking sound. Her head. It hit the corner of the stone fireplace hearth. There was so much blood. She didn't move. I tried. I checked for a pulse. But she was gone. Panic had set in. But not for Marcus. Julian described his father becoming preternaturally calm. His grief, if he felt any, was instantly superseded by a cold, terrifying pragmatism. "This is a problem," Marcus had said, his voice devoid of emotion, "and we are going to solve it." Marcus was the one who had orchestrated everything. He was the one who decided on the dismemberment, a gruesome step to prevent identification by dental records. He emotionally manipulated Julian, telling him that he was an accessory now, that they were in it together, that if one went down, they both would. Broken and conditioned by a lifetime of fear and obedience, Julian had complied. He had helped his father in the dead of night, a horrific, bloody task that had severed the last remnants of his soul. He was the one who drove the drum to the quarry and rolled it into the river. "The bird?" Miles asked, his voice a low growl. "The wooden bird." "It was in her hand," Julian said, his voice barely audible. "Leo gave it to her that afternoon. She must have been holding it when she fell. I didn't see it until it was too late to get it." Ava stayed to take Julian's formal statement. Miles stood up, a cold, burning fury in his chest. He knew Marcus would have a contingency plan. He would be destroying evidence, preparing to flee. Miles walked out of the station without a word. He didn't wait for backup. This was personal. He drove straight to the Holloway mansion, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The gates were open. He walked in through the unlocked front door and followed the low hum of a machine to the study. He found Marcus Holloway calmly feeding stacks of documents into a high-capacity shredder. Marcus looked up, not with surprise, but with a weary annoyance. "Detective, I suppose the weak link finally broke." "It's over, Marcus," Miles said, his voice dangerously quiet. Marcus switched off the shredder and turned, a faint, condescending smile on his face. "Is it? You're a broken man, Corbin. I've read your file. A disgraced cop with a bad case of PTSD who couldn't save his own partner. You think you can touch me?" Miles took a step forward, every fiber of his being wanting to unleash the violence he kept so tightly leashed. Instead, he laid out the truth like a series of blows. "I have Julian's full confession. I have the diary. I have the financial records. And I have you ordering the hit on Peter Singh. It's over." The smile on Marcus's face finally vanished. His eyes, for the first time, showed a flicker of desperation. He moved behind his massive mahogany desk, his hand disappearing into an open drawer. "You won't take me," Marcus said, his voice a low snarl. His hand reappeared, holding a sleek, black pistol. He leveled it at Miles's chest. The scene was a terrifying echo of the pasta-cornered man. A pointed gun, the smell of adrenaline in the air. The tremor in Miles's hand flared violently. For a moment, he was back in that warehouse, watching his partner fall. The study was silent save for the faint hum of the shredder's cooling fan. The gun in Marcus's hand was steady, a black, unblinking eye aimed directly at Miles's heart. The ghosts of the Philadelphia warehouse swirled around Miles, whispering of failure and fear. His own hand instinctively went to his service weapon, his thumb resting on the holster's snap. This was the moment Marcus wanted, the provocation he needed. A dead man can't testify, and a shooting, even a justified one, would throw the entire case into a maelstrom of legal challenges. But Miles was not the same man who had fled the city. Havenwood, in its own dark way, had healed him. He let out a slow, deliberate breath, forcing the tremor in his hand to subside. He looked past the gun and met Marcus's eyes. He didn't see a monster. He saw a pathetic, cornered man whose entire life was a lie. "You think this is power, Marcus?" Miles asked, his voice calm, conversational. "This gun? Your money? You destroyed everything you ever claimed to love. You beat the spirit out of your wife until she was a ghost. You twisted your son into a frightened accomplice to the most monstrous act imaginable. And you killed your daughter. You murdered Clara because she had the one thing you never did, the courage to be free of you." He took a small step forward, his hands held open, away from his weapon. "Go ahead. Shoot me. Become the killer Clara knew you were. It's the last truth your pathetic life has left to tell." Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger, his knuckles white. The standoff stretched for an eternity. And then, a new voice, clear and steady, cut through the tension. "He's not worth it, detective." They both turned. Eleanor Holloway stood in the doorway. But this was not the fragile, medicated specter Miles had met before. Her eyes were sharp and lucid, her posture erect. She had, for the first time in years, refused the sedatives her husband had so carefully provided. She was awake. She walked into the room, her gaze fixed on her husband. "I heard it all, Marcus," she said, her voice ringing with a strength he had long since beaten out of her. "I was at the top of the stairs. I heard her fall. And I heard you say it was just a problem to be solved." She turned her clear eyes to Miles. "My son is weak, detective, but he told you the truth. My husband killed my daughter. That was the final blow. It wasn't the police, not the evidence, but the ghost he had created that had come to bury him." The strength seemed to drain out of Marcus's body. The gun wavered, then fell from his limp fingers, clattering onto the expensive Persian rug. He collapsed into his leather chair, a hollowed-out man, his empire of lies reduced to rubble around him. The aftermath was a quiet earthquake that reshaped Havenwood. The trial of Marcus Holloway was a media sensation, laying bare the rot beneath the town's pristine surface. He was convicted of manslaughter for Clara's death, evidence tampering, and a litany of financial crimes that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Julian, for his cooperation, received a lesser sentence for being an accessory after the fact. The Holloway name was no longer a symbol of power, but of tragedy and disgrace. Leo Garcia was publicly exonerated. The town, in its shame, tried to make amends, but the scars remained. He found his solace in his work, and the following spring, he erected a beautiful, hand-carved bench by the river, near the spot where the drum was found. It was inscribed with a line from the book of poetry he had given Clara. "To sing the same song is to be never alone." Eleanor sold the mansion and all its contents. The day she left Havenwood, she stopped by the police station. She found Miles at his desk and simply said, "Thank you," before walking away to start a new life, finally free. Months later, autumn returned to Havenwood, painting the valley in the same brilliant colors as the year before. Miles stood by the river, the water flowing peacefully past the spot where the nightmare had begun. The case had cost him, dredging up old demons, but it had also settled something within him. He had faced the ghost of his past in Marcus Holloway's study and had not flinched. He had not let violence be the answer. Ava joined him, standing beside him in comfortable silence. Their partnership had been forged in the darkness of this case, and it had become the steadiest thing in his life. "It's quiet now," she said. "It always was," Miles replied. "We just weren't listening properly." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, wooden wren he had kept. He had looked at it every day, a reminder of the life that had been so brutally stolen. He held it in his palm for a moment, then, with a gentle toss, released it into the current. It bobbed on the surface, caught in the flow, and was slowly carried away downstream. He watched until it was gone. The silence of the river no longer felt like a secret being kept. Felt like peace.